And so last question, who's the quarterback in the NFL you want to sack the most?
I feel like it's the unanimous answer, but Mahomes.
Yes,
sir. NFL draft that's loaded with talent within the front seven. One positional group that seems to be going a little bit under the radar is the off-ball linebacker position. And today we're going to be talking about one of the best that's going to be hitting this year's draft, and that is Demetrius Knight Jr. out of South Carolina. So let's get right into it. So we were fortunate to get a little interview with Demetrius Knight at the Senior Bowl. Shout out to Dan, he handled that. I think this is going to be one of the more versatile linebackers that hits this year's draft class. There's a ton of flexibility in terms of upside with his length and his size, just over 6'1", 246, over 33-inch arms, and a ton of athleticism that he brings to the table. It's another older prospect, a 6-year senior that spent time at 3 different schools, began his career with Georgia Tech, was relatively unproductive with Georgia Tech. His head coach ended up being dismissed. He didn't play anymore. Then he transferred to Charlotte, had his breakout season, which led to his second transfer, which was over to South Carolina for this past season, where he was excellent, named the team captain, also named the most outstanding senior for South Carolina. And production-wise, over the last 2 seasons with Charlotte and South Carolina, his statistics just took off. Had a couple of sacks this past season, also had an interception, over 80 total tackles, 90 the year before. And as I touched on, I think Demetrius Knight's going to bring a lot of flexibility wherever he goes. I think there's going to be varying opinions on what this player is going to be best at, and I think there's certain areas that he's going to be better at immediately, but I think the upside stands out on what this could turn into for Demetrius Knight if the right coach gets his hands on Demetrius Knight. It gets him in a system where he feels comfortable and can play fast, because that is one of his biggest strengths, is the play speed and the instincts and the football intelligence that he showcased over this past season with South Carolina. Plus, he brings some special teams value. We saw him shut down a special teams fake punt against Oklahoma earlier this past season, which I think just spoke to the kind of player that you're getting here in Demetrius Knight. So pass game, Demetrius Knight earned a good grade for me, and this was an area that I was not expecting to get here with Demetrius Knight, just from really getting my first look at him at the Senior Bowl in terms of his movement skills. I wasn't sure that I'd see the flexibility that was going to translate over to being a good coverage piece, but actually I think in some ways I could be underselling this grade. I actually think there's more upside here. In zone coverage, he's a really nice player. There's just little knocks that I have, and in man coverage, we didn't get to see it a ton specifically at South Carolina this past season, but I actually think right now I have him pressing into a great grade as a man coverage backer. Even though we saw a limited sample size, I think the upside is tremendous with his length and his play speed, his sideline to sideline speed, his ability to change directions with really nice body control. I think there's actually a lot of upside in the pass game. He feels like a 3-down linebacker regardless of the position that he's going to be in at the next level. So when you get to the pass game, a lot of things stand out. First off, when he plays kind of in that slot role as an off-ball linebacker, when he steps over the number 3 receiver, you see a really nice feel for carrying that seam route vertically, getting contact where the receiver is before then passing that off vertically, stepping back down underneath, and working through different layers of routes over the middle of the field.
Here's a great example in a cover 3. He's playing the backside hook curl, so he's going to read the running back out of the backfield. And when he doesn't release, he gets out into coverage. But notice how he also syncs his footwork with the quarterback's footwork in his drop back. It's fantastic across the board.
He's working top down. He's a very smooth linebacker, specifically in zone coverage, that recognizes routes really well, balances eye discipline between quarterback and man, and he works between those effortlessly. He also brings a really nice change of direction, and as you'll see with some of the play speed, an immediate suddenness when he wants to hit the gas to close distance like that, and it shows up in coverage specifically. He also has an ability to create depth, and you'll see this in many different ways. Laterally, he has a real ability to create depth, to get to the sideline, to turn and run, and you also see an ability to create depth in just terms of his straight pedal. Now, I don't think it covers as much ground as you would like, and we'll talk about more of the issues here in a second, but he does share a lot of quickness in the lower body, which can create depth pretty quickly when he recognizes that he needs to create depth. One of the best aspects, I think, of his game that's going to transition very well, man coverage and zone coverage, is that transition speed. You think about putting him in a coverage in a Tampa 2 assignment as a Mike linebacker, ability to potentially carry a seam vertically. Not only does he have the length and the long speed to match that, but he's also going to bring the transition quickness to flip his hips, turn and run. Length becomes very effective when working underneath, where we mainly saw him. Running backs, tight ends into the flat, his ability to impact passing lanes, even when he sat underneath in some of his spy roles that he would play this past season, his ability to just get into passing lanes. He was an explosive leaper that was very twitched up in the lower body, that with his kind of activeness, not only could he transition coverage to rushing the passer instantly, but he could also really be effective when just settling in underneath the pass lanes because of the threat that he could cause. And we also got to see some of that body control, which is fantastic, on his one interception this past season. When right racing out to the flat, his ability to stop his forward momentum, and then make a very reactive underhand pass catching technique, athletic interception that showed a lot of flexibility. And that's the kind of play that shows what he's truly capable of as a player. That ability to slam on the brakes instantly while also having the acceleration that can match running backs or tight ends. Knox here is number one. I think there's occasions where he'll hold on to routes a little bit too long before passing them off in zone coverage and working on to the next coverage assignment. The next knock I would have that in zone coverage, he tends to float a little bit. He can get into spots where he feels a little bit lost, where he doesn't feel like he has an exact plan of where to get to. When he's working top down, it's natural, it's fast, he's flying through different reads, and it looks outstanding. In zone coverage, while he does create depth with ease, and he does a really nice job of reading quarterback's eyes and putting himself in positions to be successful, and we'll get to that more with the instincts.
You're going to see his eyes here watching the quarterback. So he's going to read into the flat here as the quarterback looks there first. But then you see that ability to get in a half turn and create depth immediately. It's a fantastic trait of his game to play through the quarterback's eyes. Running back stays in, and he's able to create really good depth on a play like this.
There are occasions where in zone coverage it feels like he's floating more than anything, and he's not actually maybe creating the proper depth, or he's not actively searching out receivers, find himself in a spot to make a play on the ball. As I touched on, I do think there is a little bit of stiffness when you talk about getting depth, but for the most part, his quick feet has an ability to make up for that. It just takes a lot more steps. He does show some hip swivel ability from off coverage, which is definitely at an adequate level, which surprised me. That was one of the biggest impressions that I had, was his ability to swivel his hips, kind of mirror backs out of the backfield. Probably not slot receivers, but tight ends as well. His focus just gets too much on the quarterback at times. There's times zone coverage where it doesn't feel like he actually has a plan of where to get to if the routes aren't presented maybe in front of him. But that being said, there's a lot of upside of what he could do in coverage. The body control is fantastic. The speed is there. The length is there. And then you get onto the instinct side of things, and as you'll see, that also is a huge part of his game. But before we get there, let's get to this play speed, because to me, this is also pressing the great category. Athletically speaking, it's a sudden, instant lateral burst, which I think does come back to his ability in terms of body control to stay balanced, to hit the gas when he needs to, but then also his flexibility to transition with ease. He stays on his toes, and he plays with really nice balance.
Now, at times, I think there's areas where he's a little bit slow to get going, and we'll touch on that. But what I do like is there's not a lot of false movement. I think that speaks to his play speed a ton. There's not a lot of false movement in space. There's not a lot of false movement when taking a direct angle to a running back. He takes fantastic angles in pursuit. It really helps him across the board in terms of that play speed.
Tend to play a little bit too slow when I think getting up to pressing the line of scrimmage or getting across the line of scrimmage, it settles him back a little bit. He could almost be too patient, and it kind of slows down his play speed, or he'll leave opportunities when gaps kind of open or present themselves to maybe scrape and get to the spot, and he allows guys to out angle him to the edge. I think there's time where he leaves things on the table that he probably shouldn't. Flip side is he'll also make those instinctive plays where he's shutting down plays beyond his responsibility. I think we even saw a flash of that in the Senior Bowl where he took off and it looks like he's blitzing. That's actually something that he showed on South Carolina as well, to transition from I'm in coverage or I'm a spy to I'm taking off to get the quarterback as soon as that opportunity arises. I think that's more to the instincts and the football intelligence that he plays with and kind of the experience that he has. Specifically as a run defender, I do think there's times where he can be a little bit slow to kind of get to his spot. Also, the fact that he does occasionally float in zone covered spots, I also think does tend to slow down his play speed, where he doesn't always feel like he has a fantastic plan of where he needs to get to. And then also as a pass rusher, I think he plays pretty fast as a pass rusher, but his constant seemingly lack of plan seem to have him playing as fast as you would like to see with what it looks like athletically. Then when it turns into a pass rusher, everything looks very vanilla as a pass rusher. So I think he slows himself down in some of the assignments or some of the technique side of things. His sideline to sideline speed is no joke. He also plays with a fantastic pace. He loves to play as kind of the tunnel outside leverage. He's very good at that. He plays with an excellent pace, sideline to sideline, which when we talk about the linebacker flexibility, is he a Will, is he Mike, whatever he is off ball, it's that ability for flexibility to be kind of the tunnel player, to fill through the tunnel but not be overly aggressive. And that's a huge aspect of his game. He paces it out well because he has the athleticism to get to the sideline, but he paces it out well when he knows that he's not the force player, or if he is the force player, he has the athleticism to get to the corner and make a play. Then he has that scrape across the formation, sideline to sideline type of closing speed with the kind of effort that matches really well for a guy that can run across the field. He does tend to cover good ground laterally when working in his own coverage. So I have him as pressing into a great grade here, a little bit over a good grade here when it comes to the play speed. But where I love him is the football intelligence and the instincts. So I showed the special teams play where he shuts down a fake punt. How about a play where he recognizes a rollout almost instantly and he's racing across the field? Now, there's definitely dangers to this rather than just directly spot dropping, but recognizing the slide protection by the offensive line, that it's a designed rollout, having a really good eye for the ball, and fantastic vision that constantly shows up across all areas, whether that's in coverage, reading the quarterback's eyes, whether that's against a run, his ability to constantly diagnose counter run plays and get a step ahead of things rather than just being relied on reading through the offensive line scheme. That leads to a lot of what we see in terms of that football intelligence. He'll completely step out and over gaps. He's not just only going to fill his gap and what he's responsible for. He will step over and outside of gaps. Downside is I think this does cause a slight delay at times. He is reading specifically the ball and not as much with the offensive line scheme. I think that balance can be thrown off at times, and you'll get examples where he just gets himself a little bit slowly into a spot, and it can allow opportunities to create seal blocks on the backside where he has to scrape across the formation, and he doesn't necessarily serve as much help. We'll also talk about this later, but specifically when there's motions pre-snap, he plays with fantastic awareness, being aware of what's there, split zones, anticipating run scheme through the split zone, look where the ball's probably going to go. The problem is he can get a little bit fixated on motions pre-snap, and that can also tend to pull him out of plays a little bit just by being a little bit overly aggressive to the movement and the eye candy that happens pre-snap. But the fantastic part is there's still a disciplined level to his game where even with the eye candy and the fakes behind the line of scrimmage, you'll see it on read option plays, his ability to know if I have outside contain, I need to get outside. His ability to get outside of lead blocking pullers, that's incredibly consistent back inside when he does become the force player, which opens up a lot of potential of a guy that can step on the line of scrimmage and be reliable discipline-wise. And at the mesh point, there's a lot of consistency because he does a nice job of balancing patience with also an aggressive attacking style downhill when that opportunity decides to present itself. You just see the click and close ability, which looks like a defensive back, which is just unreal when you watch Demetrius play. Now on to his run defense. Again, I'm pressing a great grade here, but this is kind of nuanced. For me, I don't think he's the most stout linebacker at the point of attack, which again is more of a technical side. I think the upside is fantastic with the length that he brings, with the size composition is great, and he typically comes in with a wide base, and he sets himself up early. There's a lot of things that I like, but I think in the way that he plays out, it's not consistent. The hand placement is not consistent. He doesn't consistently put himself in a position where you feel a lot of knockback at the point of attack to open up stack and shed opportunities and just be stout at the point of attack. I think that's slightly above average right now, but I think he's more so in the average category when you talk about truly shedding as a blocker. Laterally speaking, I think the agility becomes a little bit limited, and I think you see that's why he gets into kind of the half turn so quickly into coverage. I think you see it specifically when working against a run when he's focused on staying square to line of scrimmage, which he does a great job of, but he turns into a player that at that point can struggle a little bit to also then disengage off of blocks after first contact. And I think that he could use his hands a little bit better to help himself out there, and you just don't see a lot of force at the point of attack. But also I think you see some of the limited athleticism in terms of some of the lateral mobility once he gets latched. What he does incredibly well though against the run is the way that he navigates traffic, and you'll see this specifically on short yardage situations. His ability to work through traffic as a run defender is so consistent. He does a fantastic job with, again, not just filling and closing his eyes, but keeping a really good awareness and vision on the ball carrier. I think he's got some of the best vision I've seen in a while from a linebacker, and just being able to recognize consistently where the ball is. It's a very high hit rate. Another little knock here, slightly above averages as a tackler. He's a forceful hitter, which I think bodes well for his upside as a blitzer for sure, and also special teams upside. I love how he constantly goes low, and he can just stonewall guys at the point of attack.
Even on a play like this, you see the open field tackle ability, and it's because of the body control and change of direction. There's not a lot of false movement and great pacing into contact with the finish.
And he has that relentless motor to get into plays late and serve some sort of impact. The problem becomes he just misses too many tackles. He's got just over a 10% missed tackle rate, which stems from the fact that he constantly leaves his feet as a run defender. When you talk about inside the box, he tends to go a little bit more for the lower leg rather than getting a constant good strike on running backs. He can also then become a drag down tackler because he does leave his feet so often, and that's where leakage can happen. So when head on, he can stuff a running back at point of attack and drive him backwards. The flip side is when trailing, he becomes more of a drag down tackler rather than a clean tackler, and that leads to also the missed tackle rate. Though a lot that I like about his run defender. When it comes to the stoutness, I think he does have typically a good take on technique by the way that he positions himself early. He also has a little bit of an anticipation for expecting down blocks based on the run scheme. Like, okay, there's a puller, I'm probably going to get a down block here to try to seal me off so they can kick outside. He seems to have a really good sense of when that is coming, and he positions himself really well. You'll rarely find him just unaware that there's a down block and positioning himself. He actively tries to get his shoulder square to the line of scrimmage after working sideline to sideline, which is fantastic, and square himself into those blocks to give himself an opportunity to work over blocks. And he also has a little bit of slipperiness, which I think really shows up in his ability to sift through the traffic. He carries some slipperiness because he sets himself so early and he anticipates it to step down, sink down, shoulder dip, shoulder slide right underneath of offensive linemen to avoid clear contact and still be able to press and fill a gap without having to just take off upfield, but instead just press the line of scrimmage a little bit more aggressively. And the closing burst is great. I mean, there's There's no other way to put it. The closing burst is absolutely great. It's a pretty good job for the most part of avoiding overplaying a run scheme. He plays with a lot of patience on the backside, and it's very helpful for cutback runs, specifically as a run defender. I think he balances it out relatively well. He has some knee blend, which does show up for change of direction, but I think that stems more from just truly the body control. And then again, at the point of attack, in terms of the stack and shed and the stoutness, I do think that he tends to also come in too high. Even with a wide base at times, doesn't feel like he drops his weight properly. He comes in a little bit vertically, and that also leads to issues for him being able to cleanly stack and shed and disengage. It's usually not the cleanest process outside of getting his hands on early, creating the early contact, and immediately creating those stack and shed opportunities with excellent timing. Otherwise, if it lasts a little bit longer and there becomes a little bit of an engagement with the offensive lineman, that's where problems tend to occur, and it turns into kind of just I'm diving off the offensive lineman trying to go at his legs to make a tackle. That he's able to mirror the running back and where the ball is constantly. I thought it was going to be a knock when I started watching him, but it grew on me as this works really well for him. He does seem to have a good sense of what the offensive line is doing, so he's not completely lost. It's just that occasionally he'll get caught behind on run schemes because he can tend to be a little bit overly patient. That's where the balance comes into play of waiting to see where the ball goes rather than attacking in terms of reading through the run scheme and just attacking off of that. Back to the vision aspect, it also allows him to play beyond his gaps. It's not just, I gotta fill the B gap and that's it, that's where I'm going, we'll see if the ball gets here. He can play beyond that. So again, counter runs, counter pulls, misdirection in the backfield, mesh points, there's success there that you don't typically expect, which allows him to create upside to go above and beyond the natural situation. As the easy speed out into the flats, I think it leads to some real upside as a man coverage piece. I think that's an area that, again, he could tap into being great in the NFL, depending on assignment. I don't think he'd be great on receivers, but I think for the most part, he has a capability to match up with the tight end with his explosiveness. He just doesn't bring some of the height that, of course, that you would love, but he does show change of direction ability. Though he's not the most fluid athlete, and it could give him problems where his anticipation could get ahead of himself, he does show a real ability to change directions and play within himself. So if he's matched up with more vertical threats at tight end, less of the more dynamic route runners, say like a Travis Kelce, for example, if he's less on those type of pieces and it's more running backs out the backfield, it's tight ends with more of a vertical push, I think that's an area that he can thrive and play fast in those spots. It can also open up Sam Backer upside as well, where he can press these tight ends off the line and be physical. My biggest disappointment was to see the blitz production. In terms of as a blitzer, he grades out pretty well. He has some solid production. It's not the level I was hoping that it would be. First off, there just wasn't a lot of creativity as a blitzer in general here. I think his lateral agility shows up as much more of an issue in these spots where there's not a ton of clean disengagement. There's not a lot of side steps. There just isn't much of a plan outside of really just slanting as a rusher, trying to shoot and attack a gap, or outside of being a little bit decisive, being more decisive than an offensive lineman and beating him to a spot because he wasn't expecting to rush, and then here he goes. There's those opportunities where he's a spy and he turns it to a rush, and he can go from playing coverage to rush the passer. When a quarterback escapes the pocket, you better believe that this guy is going to be a nightmare for a quarterback, a mobile quarterback to deal with, and this is the kind of player that you want in space because there is some of that change of direction ability. The problem becomes is that as just a true blitzer, as of now, he hasn't brought the consistency that you would be looking for. He lacks, I think, some of the reactive awareness of what's around him to set himself up better, and again, there's just not a lot of creativity as a pass rusher at this time. It's very basic, and I think the agility shows up more as an issue here, but there is suddenness. I think he's much more of an average blitzer now with upside, but I think I'm even counting in the upside when I give him that average grade because of the fact that I don't think he had nearly the production that I was hoping to see. So that being said, I think that this is a linebacker that brings tons of flexibility. I think that he fits as a 4-3 like linebacker defensively. I think this is a guy that has that opportunity in terms of the awareness that he plays with, the football intelligence, and you see some of the communication pre-snap that could allow him to potentially down the road be a green dot, but really play that Mike Backer role where he can play in a 4-3 defense, cover a lot more ground, and be capable of taking on blocks at the point of attack, be capable of sifting through traffic and navigating the trash. The problem is I just don't think his take on and shed is as consistent as you would love it for that role. He could step in and be immediately productive as more of a will backer where you're hopefully having to deal a little bit less with kind of the point of attack, contact at the point of attack as a blocker, and instead you're asking him to fly around, make really good reads out the backside, be patient. That fits his skill set, I think, well. That could be successful immediately. So I think he has that capability where in defenses he can be flexible to how you align. We saw with South Carolina, he would line up as a field side linebacker, so he always played towards the strong side of the field. He always lined up to where there was more field because of the ground that he could cover. So I think there's upside for both sides. I even think there's capabilities to step down, play on the line of scrimmage if you wanted to play more of a Sam Backer role, because I think that he has the tools to do that. I just don't think we've seen the consistency when he's been on the line of scrimmage, one as a blitzer, and number two, also as a run defender. The stoutness, the take on, he sets himself up really well early, and he has very good vision and off ball that excels. I don't think at on the line of scrimmage that would excel as often. Right now, he would have to develop his ability to deal with blockers at the point of attack much better. And his blitzing upside to me didn't excel to a point where you feel like he'd be a great matchup constantly there. That being said, though, clearly has the coverage upside and brings the tools to play that. I think he has 3-4 inside linebacker capabilities as well. So I think there's a lot of flexibility with this piece. Obviously in 3-4, maybe you could ask him to do a little bit less in coverage, cut the field a little bit shorter, maybe allow him to play a little bit more short area situations, which could be better for him potentially. Make sure that he's a little bit more assignment aware of where his guy is, and there's less that he has to kind of work through, and just allow him to play at his fastest. I think if you get him in the right spot, he knows his reads, he knows his keys, and he knows where he has to get to, his play speed and his football intelligence and instincts absolutely shine. He just has a knack for playing the position. So I think if you could take a little bit off his plate in terms of the amount of ground he has to cover, that could be fantastic. However, he definitely has the athleticism to cover a lot of ground. So I think this is going to be one of the more diverse linebackers coming out in this year's draft in terms of flexibility that he can play on the field. And to me, he's one of the better linebackers I think that are going to be coming out this year with a very well-rounded skill set, an older prospect which will concern some, but with a great build with athleticism and really nice length, that's hard to find. When it comes to my final grade, I end up giving him a 6.6 here. I think I am banking on some upside, and I think that if you're concerned about his age, you drop this down to a 6.5, maybe in a 6.4. I think that drops it down significantly that he is on the older side, but I think 6.6 could potentially be the ceiling of where you could get to on a grade here. Maybe someone could even get higher. I think in the right spot, this player can play extremely fast. I wouldn't be surprised if I walk away from this thinking that this is the best linebacker. I really have that balance between a 6.55 and a 6.6. That may tweak, that small amount may adjust. If you didn't see my last video of Darius Alexander, I have him at a 6.15 officially now. Again, those numbers can tweak when I start getting grades that are very similar, and I have to kind of decide one over the other, so I get a 6.16. So I have it right now at a 6.15 for Darius Alexander, and I'm going to go with Demetrius Knight Jr. out of South Carolina as a 6.6. That fit is going to matter a lot, but I also think that he could bring special teams impact immediately, and that's going to be something that teams love. The age is the hardest thing to process. If you're worried about the age, I drop that grade a little bit because of some of the upside there. But if you're not as concerned about the age and you're looking for a well-rounded linebacker that's just going to fly around and make plays from day one, I would push the grade potentially even a little bit higher. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'm